This is my presentation on what I learned in adolescence. In chapter 1, I learned about history, stereotypes, technology, and periods of development. According to Plato, reasoning does not belong to childhood, but rather it appears in adolescence. And according to Aristotle, the most important aspect of adolescence is the ability to choose. Teenagers should be able to choose for themselves and be self determined as opposed to being imposed anything from their parents, peers, or mentors. Adolescents are typically stereotyped by others. Some of the stereotypes that are used are they are lazy, all they think about is sex, and the problem with adolescents today is that they have it too easy. We also turn into technology. Cell phone use and media have increased and become the center of attention in adolescents' lives. On average, 11 to 14-year-olds are exposed to 12 hours of social media per day. We also turn into the periods of development. This includes the biological, the cognitive, and the social emotional processes. First, we have the biological, which has physical change. Then we have the cognitive, which is change in the thinking and intelligence. And lastly, we have the social emotional process, which is personal and relationship emotions begin to take place in the individual lives. In chapter 2, I learned about puberty, health, and biological foundations. Puberty is not only a time of physical change, it is also a time of hormonal change. The hormones that we see in males are called androgens, and the ones that we see in females are called estrogens. This is also a time where both male and female start to get pubic hair. Male's voice starts to change, women's breasts start to grow, and they also get their first menstrual period. In terms of health, we see that adolescents engage in risk-taking behaviors, and the three leading causes of death are accidents, homicides, and suicides. We also see the eating disorders have increased, and it is important for us to enhance healthy foods and regular exercise for teenagers. In terms of biological foundations, we see that even though twins come from the same parents and they have the same genes, they won't be exactly the same in everything. In chapter 3, I learned about brain and cognitive development. The three main brain structures that are considered to be important are the prefrontal cortex, which is the highest level of the frontal lobes that is involved in reasoning, decision making, and self control. Then we have the corpus callosum, which helps process information, and the amygdala, which involves emotion. We also learned about the Piaget's theory, which I think is very important because, according to his theory, adolescents are motivated to understand the world because it helps them adapt. Also, they have to construct the information that they get because it does not just come to them from the environment. They have to make something out of it. They have to make sense of the world, experience, and organize everything, and they organize things from what they consider to be most important to least important. And they also connect the ideas to one another. They need new ideas in order to add additional information and further their understandings. Chapter 4 is about self, identity, and personality. For this chapter, I focused mainly on Erickson's theory. He believes that parents and adults like to impose things on children and adolescents, but he believes that that is not okay because adolescents need the opportunity to explore themselves and to experience new things. He understands that parents often like to guide and support their kids because they don't want them to get involved in bad behaviors, but he says that in turn, most adolescents eventually discard undesirable roles. During the identity development, teens begin to understand and explore who they are. Nothing is set and they change their mind often, so what they like one day they might hate the next because nothing is set. They go day by day. He also says that identity crisis is normal and teens need to be able to reflect on their ideas because it gives them a sense of worth. Chapter 5 is based on gender. We see a lot of stereotypes, and I also discovered that parents are important figures in adolescents' development of identity because the more influence that parents have on their teen's life, the better relationship and positive identity that the teens will have, and they will have better relationships with others, and they will create healthy choices and positive behaviors. We also see a lot of stereotypes, such as girls like pink, boys like blue, girls cook and clean, boys like cars and sports. These are simply stereotypes and does not mean that they are true. We see that masculine traits include being forceful, defending own beliefs, being dominant, and being aggressive. We see feminine characteristics as being gentle, understanding, and loves children. We also discover androgyny is when a person has high levels of both masculinity and femininity. An example of this is when an individual might be a male who is assertive, which is a male characteristic, but he is also sensitive to others, which is a feminine characteristic. Or when a female who is both dominant and caring, which dominant is masculine and caring is feminine. So these two scenarios show a person who is androgynous and not only feminine or not only masculine. Chapter 6 is all about sexuality. In this chapter, it is possible to see that in the US, the society sends mixed messages about sex to the youth. On one side, we see that adolescents, especially girls, are told not to have sex. But then on the other one, we see that sex is portrayed in the media as positive, which is mostly for boys. Sex is used all over the media. We can see it in movies, internet, in videos, in shows, and even in commercials. We also explore sexual identity. Developing a sexual identity deals with physical factors, social factors, and cultural factors. And adolescent sexuality identity involves an indication of sexual orientation, whether an individual has same sex or other sex attractions. They are involved in such activities and interests and styles of behavior. We also see heterosexual activities and behaviors. These are sexual initiation that varies by different ethnic groups at different times. For example, some can start their first sexual encounter as early as age 13, or some others can start their first sexual encounters at age 20. We also explore self stimulation, and regardless of the sexual orientation, it is common for teens to abstain from sex, and the way to abstain from sex is through masturbation. Masturbation is the most frequent sexual outlet for many adolescents, especially male ones. The last important part about this chapter is that we must educate adolescents when it comes to protection. It is necessary for teens to know that using contraception, such as condoms, can reduce the risk of unintended and unwanted pregnancies, and it can prevent sexual transmitted infections and diseases. Chapter 7 is about moral development, values, and religion. In this chapter, I learned about Kohlberg theories. The first theory is that pre-conventional reasoning is the lowest level in the theory, and it has two stages. One of them is punishment and obedient orientation, and the second one is individualism, instrumental purpose, and exchange. This means that children and adolescents listen because they get punished if they don't do so. In the second theory, or second level, individuals abide by certain standards, but there are also standards of others, such as the parents of the law, the society. In conventional reasoning, individuals develop expectations about social roles. And in the last level, which is the post conventional reasoning, is the highest level in the moral development theory. At this level, morality is more internal. The individuals recognize alternative moral courses, explore the options, and then decide on a moral code. In post-conventional reasoning, individuals engage in deliberate checks on their own reasoning to ensure that it meets high ethical standards. In this chapter, I also learned about religious interest and its increases. It increases when there is a good relationship with parents, which leads to adopting the parents' beliefs. If an adolescent is into religion, then they will have positive outcomes, and instead of being into deviant behaviors, they would be more careful and they would pay more attention in school and do other positive things instead of drug use and sex. Religion also links to sexuality because it persuades adolescents to abstain from sex until marriage. Chapter 8 is about families. And some parents like to act as managers, which this means that they help their adolescents reach their full potential. Parents can assume a role of a manager and find information, make contacts, help structure choices, and provide guidance. Parents who fulfill this important managerial role help adolescents to avoid pitfalls and to work their way through a myriad of choices and decisions they face. Having routines such as setting homework time and bedtime positively relates to students' grades. We also see different parenting styles. We have the authoritarian parenting, which is a restrictive, punitive style in which the parents exhort the adolescents to follow directions and respect work and effort. We also see the authoritative parenting, which encourages adolescents to be independent but still place limits and controls on their actions. We also see neglectful parenting, which is a style in which parents uninvolved in the adolescent's life. And lastly, we have the indulgent parenting, a style in which parents are highly involved with the adolescents but place few demands or controls on them. So from here we see that the first parenting style is that the parents have complete control. There is no freedom for the adolescents. In the second one, the adolescents have some freedom, but the parents still have majority of the control. In the neglectful parenting, we see that the parents do not even bother getting involved in the adolescent's life. And in the last parenting style, we see that the parents are involved in the student's life, but they place very little controls and demands. Chapter 9 is about peers, romantic relationships, and lifestyles. In this chapter, I learned that feeling accepted and liked by everyone is the most important thing in the adolescent's life. Not being accepted can lead to anxiety, stress, and being accepted can have positive behaviors, but not being accepted can have negative behaviors. We also see that popular children are frequently nominated as a best friend and are rarely disliked by others. We also see the average children receive an average number of both positive and negative nominations from their peers. We see the neglected children are infrequently nominated as best friend but not disliked by their peers. We see the rejected children are frequently nominated as someone's best friend and are actively disliked by peers. Then we see the controversial children are frequently nominated both as someone's best friend and as by being disliked. Chapter 10 is all about schools. In this chapter, I learned that many high school graduates are not only poorly prepared for college, but they are also poorly prepared for the demands of modern high performance workplace. Education is not what it used to be because many teens are more interested in fitting in and standing out instead of the actual education and their achievements. In order to increase the child's education, we must all motivate teens to be involved in their academics. The National Research Council recommends that in order to increase this, we must make education exciting so that they feel like they are a part of something instead of only being a part of having a relationship with their peers. Chapter 11 it's all about achievements, work, and career. In this chapter, I learned that social relations are based on peers, parents, teachers, and mentors. I also learned about two different motivational factors. The first one is the intrinsic motivational, which is internal motivation, and has factors such as self determination, curiosity, challenge, which is when you do something for yourself, you set your own goals, your own challenges, and then we see the extrinsic motivation, which is the external motivation factor, such as rewards and punishments. So we do something based on others. It could be our parents, our teachers, our peers, but we do it because we either get a reward or we get punished. In this chapter, I also learned that not only are there people who procrastinate, but there are also people who like to be perfect in everything they do. A student who suffers from procrastination tends to ignore the task, hoping that it would go away, or they underestimate the work and they take long to do it, and resulting in not a good work. They don't give their best, they just do the bare minimum. They spend more time in computer games and surfing the internet instead of their education, and they deceive themselves as mediocre or poor performance is acceptable. A perfectionist, on the other hand, sets high standards for themselves and works hard to achieve everything they want to do, and it usually has a positive outcome. However, when they strive to be perfect, sometimes they make mistakes, and making mistakes can make them highly stressed. Being a perfectionist, they set extensively high and unrealistic goals that cannot be reached. And if they do not reach the goals that they set for themselves, they feel worthless. This can lead to anxiety and suicidal attempts. In order to get away from this mindset, teens should set up realistic goals that they want for themselves and that are based on their own expectations instead of the expectations of others. Chapter 12 is all about culture, exploring and understanding other cultures. We can see that US adolescents spend more time in paid work than people in other countries. We can also see that males in other countries spend more time in paid work, while females spend more time in unpaid household. We also discover poverty in that children and adolescents from low socioeconomical backgrounds are at risk for experiencing low achievement and emotional problems, as well as lower occupational attainment in adulthood. Poor adolescents are more exposed to social maladaptation and psychological problems such as depression, low self esteem, peer conflict, and juvenile delinquency. They experience more conflict, violence, instability, and chaos in their homes. They get less social support, and their parents are less responsive and are more authoritarian. We move on to ethnicity. It is important to educate teens on the subject of ethnicity because many ethnic minorities adolescents experience prejudice, discrimination, and bias. Failure to recognize that diversity within an ethnic majority group can lead to stereotyping. The last chapter is chapter 13, and it talks about problems in adolescence and emerging adulthood. I focus mainly on stress because I feel like it's something that a lot of teens go through, and we can see that life events can happen and can stress in adolescent. Some of these factors are breaking up in a relationship that has been long term, or the death of someone that you loved, or their parents getting divorced, or maybe they have a life threatening disease, a personal injury, or they suffered from a natural disaster around them. We also have daily stress. Daily stress could be they didn't have enough time to study, or they weren't recognized at work, or they're not recognized at school, or they simply have a boring job. Then there are three different ways of coping with stress. The first is a problem focused coping, which is when they find a solution to a problem. For example, if someone wants to buy a concert ticket but they don't have enough money, then they will solve the problem by working extra hours to make up for the money that they need. The second one is the emotion focused coping, which is more of ignoring the problem. For example, not showing up to a class because they think the class is boring is how they will solve that problem. And the last one is the avoiding coping because they simply avoid the problem, they don't acknowledge it at all, and this usually leads to depression or suicide. It is important that teens find help when they cannot cope with stress and that they think positive instead of negatively.